When discussing African nations post-independence, many people fall into the trap of assuming the same tired narrative: economic collapse, political instability, and a descent into becoming a basket case or a so-called banana republic. This story is all too familiar, right? Wrong. Kwame Nkrumah, the visionary leader of Ghana, recognized early on that his newly independent nation was home to a complex array of tribes, ethnic groups, and smaller communities, each with its own unique identity. He foresaw the possibility of Western powers exploiting these divisions to destabilize Ghana, as they had done in other African countries. To counter this, Nkrumah took immediate action to promote a strong sense of national unity. His strategy? He pushed the concept of one nation, an idea that transcended tribal lines. In a bold move, he even banned the display of tribal flags across the country, aiming to forge a collective Ghanaian identity. While this measure was seen by many as overkill and largely ignored by the populace, Nkrumah's foresight in recognizing the dangers of tribalism was remarkable, especially when you consider the tragic ethnic conflicts that later erupted in places like Sudan, Biafra, Rwanda, and the Congo. Nkrumah's reforms didn't stop there. He was deeply committed to the education and empowerment of his people. Understanding that education was the key to Ghana's future, he made primary education compulsory for all children, ensuring that the next generation would have the tools to build a brighter future. He also extended support to private employers, offering subsidies and tax breaks to those who actively trained and provided apprenticeships to young men in various industries. But perhaps most striking was Nkrumah's progressive stance on gender equality in a deeply patriarchal society. He took unprecedented steps to elevate the status of women, moving them into key positions within his Convention People's Party, CPP, and passing legislation that reserved specific parliamentary seats exclusively for women. Furthermore, he encouraged more Ghanaian women to pursue higher education and implemented cooperative programs to support female traders, helping them establish a stronger foothold in the economy. One of Nkrumah's crowning achievements was the completion of the Akosombo Dam in 1966. This massive infrastructure project not only created a wealth of new jobs, but also provided the country with a critical source of hydroelectric power, fueling Ghana's industrialization efforts. Nkrumah, driven by a determination to prove that African nations could achieve what European nations had, relentlessly pursued development programs aimed at modernizing Ghana. His ambition was clear. He wanted Ghana to stand as a shining example of what an African nation could accomplish. Economically, Nkrumah's vision paid off. Ghana's GDP surged, the nation was thriving, and there was a palpable sense of optimism in the air. However, as Ghana prospered, Nkrumah began to accumulate enemies, both domestically and internationally. His idealism had led him to believe that Ghana had truly gained its independence on March 6, 1957, and that the country would now be free to compete on a level playing field with Western powers. Unfortunately, Nkrumah soon realized that the reality was far more complicated. The West had no intention of relinquishing its influence so easily. What Nkrumah discovered was a new form of control, which he famously termed neo-colonialism. This was the strategy by which former colonial powers continued to exert control over newly independent nations through economic and political means, even after the physical occupation had ended. Today, the concept of neo-colonialism is widely understood and frequently discussed, but at the time, it was a groundbreaking insight, especially from someone often dismissed by the West as lacking intellectual rigor. Kwame Nkrumah coined the term neo-colonialism to describe a situation in which Western nations continued to exert control over African countries without taking responsibility for their well-being. As Nkrumah put it, neo-colonialism meant exploitation without redress. This idea became a cornerstone of his political philosophy, and he was not shy about taking action against it. One of the most notable examples of this was when Nkrumah decided to raise taxes on Ashanti goldfields, a British company that was making massive profits while paying Ghanaian laborers a pittance for their hard work. The British, unsurprisingly, were outraged. Nkrumah had directly challenged their economic interests, and in doing so, painted a target on his back. But Britain wasn't his only adversary. Across the Atlantic, Nkrumah was also stirring up trouble with the United States. The CIA was keeping a close eye on Nkrumah, furiously exchanging memos about how he was spreading his brand of nationalism throughout Africa. Nkrumah's call for a united Africa, or what some refer to as Pan-Africanism, was seen as a direct threat. His vision of Africa uniting both economically and politically under a single banner, similar to the European Union, was radical. He believed that by banding together, African nations could fend off external manipulators and economic extortionists. Interestingly, before the European Union came into existence, the idea of a common market was initially supposed to include African nations as well. However, Nkrumah rallied African leaders to avoid entering into what he saw as a rigged deal with Europe, leaving the common market as a Europe-only initiative. Nkrumah's efforts weren't confined to Ghana. Long before it became a popular cause in the West, Nkrumah was financially supporting Black South Africans in their fight against apartheid. His influence also extended to the Congo, one of the most resource-rich regions, not only in Africa, but in the entire world. Nkrumah provided funding to anti-Western factions during the country's civil war, a move that made many Western powers uneasy. The man who the FBI had once underestimated as lacking intelligence and the British had dismissed as harmless was proving to be a formidable player on the global stage. John Stockwell, a former CIA operative, later blew the whistle on many of the agency's covert operations. In the 1980s, he revealed that by 1964, a plan had been hatched between Britain and the U.S. to remove Nkrumah from power. In her book, White Miles, the CIA and the Neo-Colonization of Africa, Suzanne Williams quotes Britain's High Commissioner in Accra as saying, "It is in the interest of Britain that Nkrumah should cease to rule Ghana." With that, the wheels of a covert operation were set in motion. The U.S. took direct action to weaken Ghana's economy, specifically by suppressing the world price of cocoa, one of Ghana's primary exports. Inside the country, the CIA launched a propaganda campaign aimed at undermining Nkrumah's popularity. The campaign was so effective that by 1965, American Ambassador William Mahoney reported, "Popular opinion is running strongly against Nkrumah, and the economy is in a precarious state." Nkrumah, however, was not oblivious to these developments. He knew he was playing a dangerous game. As the West intensified its efforts to destabilize him, Nkrumah sought alliances elsewhere. In 1966, he traveled to Beijing in an attempt to build relationships with China and the Soviet Union, both emerging global powers at the time. Unfortunately for Nkrumah, this trip would prove to be a critical mistake. While Nkrumah was abroad, the CIA made its move. Utilizing its assets within Ghana, the agency helped orchestrate a coup d'etat. According to Stockwell, the operation was led by Howard Bain, the CIA's station chief in Accra, who was instrumental in overthrowing Nkrumah. Bain's efforts were so successful that he received a double promotion and was awarded the Intelligence Star for his role in the operation. The brilliance of Bain's maneuver, Stockwell noted, was that he managed to execute the entire plan without leaving any documented trail linking the CIA's leadership to the coup. And just like that, Nkrumah's rule came to an end. He was left stranded in China before eventually finding refuge in Guinea, another African nation that was on the CIA's radar. Nkrumah's exile marked the end of an era, but it also left behind a troubling question. What if he had remained in power? Some critics argue that Nkrumah was not without flaws. He had dictatorial tendencies, having passed laws that effectively turned Ghana into a one-party state. He dismissed judges whose rulings he disagreed with and, by many accounts, appeared intoxicated by the power he wielded. It's possible that had he remained in power, he might have followed the path of other African leaders who became autocrats. However, the truth is, we'll never know. What is clear is that Nkrumah was a threat, not just to Ghana's internal politics, but to the broader geopolitical landscape. He challenged the existing power structures both in Africa and the West, and for that, he paid the price. The governments that succeeded him fared far worse. Corruption soared, human rights abuses became rampant, and Ghana's economy spiraled into chaos. One of the coup plotters even admitted less than a year after Nkrumah's ousting that the situation had deteriorated drastically. The irony of Nkrumah's downfall is that he was taken down by the very powers he had sought to protect Africa from. His legacy, for all its complexities, remains a cautionary tale about the ongoing struggle between African independence and Western interests. This is it for today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more future updates. Thanks for watching.